Up next, I would like to present the director of the CEC's Energy Efficiency Division. Michael Sokol leads this division. It develops and administers programs, policies, and regulations to achieve California's energy and water efficiency goals. Over the past decade, Michael has provided leadership and program management across multiple divisions in the organization, actually, not just this one, advancing decarbonization of California's energy and building sectors. Please welcome Michael Sokol.
Hello and good morning, everyone. It's nice to see so many smart and passionate minds here gathering, and I'm happy to be here. My name is Mike Sokol. Michael, either one is fine. So often go by Sokol because I've been with so many Mikes and Michaels throughout my life, so whatever your preference. I'm the director of the Efficiency Division at the California Energy Commission. Have the pleasure of working closely with a number of other CEC folks that are represented here today, including a couple from the previous panel. And today I'm going to present on a topic broadly titled Affordability and Equity in California's Clean Energy Future. Full disclosure, I am also not a building energy modeler. Specifically, I do have quite a background in various aspects of energy policy, regulatory initiatives, and technologies across supply and demand side. And most recently, I've been acting in this role for over 6 years as the director of the Efficiency Division. So really just for some framing, I'm hoping that this provides some policy context that complements and kind of maps out some of the initiatives that impact the modeling community here, but also fits well with some of the other topics that are going to be discussed in greater depth. But for context, I want to take a step back and remind everyone the CEC, we're part of the state of California, which is pushing to decarbonize the entire economy by 2045. CEC's role is to lead the state to 100% clean energy. And that includes the whole energy supply. There's a lot of focus on demand side issues, transportation, you name it. If there's something with energy going on, the CEC has a role in the state of California. And I've had a chance to participate and really get a front row seat in a lot of the progress that's occurred in the last decade and a half. But the roots of the CEC go back 50 years. In fact, this year we're celebrating our 50th year anniversary, and so there's a lot of good outreach material and reminders of why the CEC was created in the first place, the success that we've had over the last 5 decades. There's a really good video that summarizes some of that that's floating around that really emphasizes energy efficiency at the core of the benefits the CEC has realized, and also setting a standard for the nation and other states to follow suit. This is just kind of an outline of what I'm going to go through, but starting with a high-level overview of some of the progress we've been making in recent years. Of course, acknowledging there are some challenges more recently that we're squaring up with that also impact the energy code, which is highly beneficial, but also has unique nuances that we have to work through in the coming years. And a whole suite of solutions that we're working on, some of which you'll hear in more depth, including the BPS initiative that was just talked about. As well as, it was good to hear some discussion on existing buildings, which is really an area of focus at the CEC broadly, recognizing all the progress that's happened on the new construction side in recent cycles. So starting with overview of progress, just a reminder, it's been really cool to see and have such a close role with all this policy work over the last few years in the state of California. It is amazing to take a step back and look at how much progress has been made across the board on clean energy policies. So when I started out, there was, RPS was like a twinkle in the eye, and there was a lot of skepticism we were ever going to get anywhere. Well, just in a few short years, we blew through, getting to a 50% renewable portfolio standard. Now we're on a trajectory to 100% renewable and zero carbon by 2045. And we've really continued to blow past all of our mile markers with over 2/3 of electricity coming from zero carbon and renewables. As of 2023, targets for 90% by 2035 and then 100% in the coming years. So it's very amazing to see that all progressing so quickly, really. As part of that, and as we see renewables grow, and looking back a few years, some of the reliability challenges that ramped up with with a tricky period in time. Energy storage has just continued to grow so quickly and accelerated faster than I think anyone would have guessed. In fact, this is even outdated at this point, and we're roughly at 17 gigawatts of installed energy storage capacity this year. So it's amazing to see that we're also focusing on firming up the grid, making sure we have the ability to shift load as necessary, and complementing the renewable growth that's happening on the supply side. And then on the demand side, of course, there's electric vehicles where we're electrifying transportation, and we're over 2 million today. It's again another amazing success story to see that roughly a third of new vehicles sold in California are zero emission vehicles as of last quarter, I believe. So, and we're on a target policy goal to get to 100% of new sales by 2035. And I know there's again some challenges and some headwinds in that, but we are seeing growth that's impacting the demand side of the equation as well. And then zeroing in more on buildings, the focus that we've had in the last few years is broadly building decarbonization. How are we going to reduce emissions within the building sector over time? And the key solution that we're focused on there is heat pumps, which are efficient electric technologies, as everyone here is well aware, that are being advanced through a bunch of initiatives, incentive programs, policies, local initiatives. The energy code is a big driver of a lot of those for new construction. And in fact, you'll see that we're roughly 2.1 million as of now installed in California, with a goal for 6 million by 2030. It's going to be a tough trajectory to get to the 2030 goal. If you look beyond 2030, we need way more than that going out to 2045. So we have started to climb that hill to a degree, but with a long way to go. You'll see there's a little bend in the curve right there with 2022, which is 2022 energy code going into effect. So hopefully we see another little bend with the 2025 code going into effect in January 1. Overall, on the efficiency side, California continues to rank #1 in the country in terms of state energy efficiency. It's also true for water efficiency, by the way, and this is the ACEEE State Energy Efficiency Scorecard. I think we lost the top slot at one point, 5-6 years ago. We reclaimed that. We've been there for the last couple cycles, largely due to a lot of the work that some of you in the room are contributing to. And we hope to continue that top spot by taking additional actions. And I'll speak to some of those in a minute. And all the while, California's economy, we continue to grow. So I think it depends on the day that you snapshot exactly where we are in the world rank order of the size of the economy by GDP. But we've grown significantly just during the same time frame that we're talking about these policy goals. California, I think, is either number 4 or number 5, depending upon the day you're looking at, and continues to grow strong, which is exciting to see that we can kind of tackle both of those things at the same time. Now, it's worth acknowledging, despite all of that success, all the amazing progress, which again blows me away when I just take a step back and look at all that, we are facing up to some unique challenges at this point in history. Starting with, we're seeing a shift in federal policy that's really demonizing clean energy, making it harder to pursue renewables. Even efficiency measures are creating headwinds, with tax credits, incentives going away, and policies that favor fossil fuels. So that's an uphill battle. It impacts certainly appliance efficiency, building efficiency. At the state level, we also have had some budget constraints in recent years and some policy constraints that are kind of driven by some of those budget issues. A few years ago, we had a $100 billion surplus in the state budget, which was just amazing to see. And that launched a whole bunch of initiatives, including $1 billion for equitable building decarbonization. Amazing to see. Since that time, we've had sort of a projected deficit for a couple of years, and we've had to kind of backtrack on some of the investments we were hoping to commit. But still, the watermark is higher than it was during that period. But as we look outwards, there are some uncertainties on the economy that we don't know what's going to come around the corner. Affordability, of course, is something that impacts all of us in this room and across the entire country. We're still dealing with the impacts of inflation. We're looking specifically at housing affordability challenges across the state, energy affordability with some of the recent rate increases and overall bill increases is really top of mind in a lot of the legislative and policy discussions. And the importance of compliance supports that. That's something across all of our programs we're looking at very closely. The benchmarking program you've heard about, the BPS program we're contemplating. How do we think ahead to make sure compliance is sort of the default path, and there's different pathways to drive compliance. But also on the energy code side, which is such a unique and complicated ecosystem. It's the most complex regulatory ecosystem I've ever worked in, and I've worked with 5 of the divisions at the CEC covering a broad range of issues. And AB 130, so that's something that I think is probably on a lot of folks' minds, introducing some regulatory restrictions on the types of measures that we can consider for building standards for the next few years. So just some of the headwinds there. Affordability is really top of mind, and that includes both the first costs component as well as the operating costs. Efficiency and building and appliance efficiency standards, I think we're in a good position because really it's baked into the process that everything's required to be cost effective. So we look closely at the cost side of the equation, and we look closely at the benefit side of the equation, and the benefits far outweigh the costs as we look at measures that we want to advance. But it's still something that we need to look carefully at that first cost side of the equation. There was a recent governor's executive order on affordability that directed the CEC and the Public Utilities Commission, among other actions, to both those agencies look at programs that are ratepayer funded and assess sort of what opportunities to support affordability might look like. The good news there is that the codes and standards initiatives and a lot of the efficiency programs broadly are highly cost effective and beneficial, with $200 billion, actually more than that, in savings over that 50-year period coming from efficiency codes and standards. But there's also other costs that are being closely looked at, including wildfire costs, some of the legacy tariff issues with net energy metering. There's a lot of scrutiny on some of the different cost drivers, really with an eye on consumers. How do we make sure customer costs are affordable? So housing affordability, we talked about, but really as you look at, again, on inflation, wages not keeping up with inflation, housing prices going up, and interest rates going up, we really are in a situation where homes are less affordable than they have been across the state of California. This is based on some legislative analyst data from California, and so it is a hot topic within the legislature right now. In fact, I just testified last week to a committee that was looking at housing affordability and really regulatory impacts on housing affordability. So there's a lot of discussions ongoing. But in addition to that, we're looking at energy affordability as a hot topic, really focusing on kind of the rate escalation of recent years. And this is just a graphic that illustrates in recent history how rates have progressed over time. And you'll see it's only in the last few years that we've really seen inflation-adjusted rates going up considerably. So the key point here is that it's not attributable to the clean energy initiatives that we've been advancing in the state of California, but really you see that increase really start to ramp up around and in response to that many of the major wildfires across the state. So I think this is an area beyond my expertise, but certainly important and impactful for the efficiency and affordability discussions that we're having here. So equity, energy equity. I had the privilege several years ago of working on an initiative across several agencies with some other colleagues that are in the room, Bill Pennington, on addressing the barriers that low-income customers face in accessing clean energy, including efficiency and other clean energy measures. And that's actually led to an ongoing focus and a priority across state programs to make sure we're considering the impact of low-income consumers primarily in the programs, but also the benefits of that. And part of it is tracking progress on what are the indicators that show how energy equity is advancing across the state. So there's a renewed push at the CEC to get better with our data tracking and visualization of energy equity indicators. There's actually kind of a beta GIS map that's on our website that looks at energy affordability, including energy burden, but also this new energy affordability index. There's also discussions at the other regulatory agencies that are looking to better track this as well. And not just look at the statewide average, but really break it down for what does that mean for low-income consumers who are facing very high energy burdens in certain areas and rising as the costs increase across the state. So, translating all of that to, okay, the energy code. What's the situation here? And the good news, as everybody knows, we're in a very good position with energy code initiatives. The 2025 code, the most advanced efficiency code in the nation, goes into effect January 1. It's going to save almost $5 billion for consumers over the next 30 years. A ton of emission savings, highly cost beneficial. It's going to contribute a lot of those heat pumps and as well as this distributed generation, PV batteries, and position for the lowest cost for all electric buildings across the state. And we're actually seeing that impact as well, which comes in a later data set. And we're well ahead of the rest of the nation across all climate zones, where we look at the gas usage and electricity usage compared to the IECC across California's climate zones. California is way ahead of the curve in terms of the public benefit there. Perhaps most importantly, the energy code also contributes to customer bill savings directly. This is sort of a theoretical exercise that looks at comparing the California energy code to the national code, as well as if the 2006 national code as a baseline, if we sort of didn't have energy code measures in effect. So others could speak to sort of the details and nuances, and there's a lot there. But most importantly, compared to the current national code, it's almost saving half the cost compared to the 2024 IECC. So bill savings is front of mind. And of course, that's all in theory, and much of that is happening in practice. But we do know that the system is imperfect. And so something we're taking a close look at is what are the impacts of non-compliance on costs? If there are poor projects that are installed incorrectly, if there's certain measures that are not implemented, if there's other issues that may come up, and I think we heard about some of that in the BPS context that are unanticipated. All of those have costs, and so we want to make sure that we keep an eye on what the potential benefit and how to minimize those non-compliance costs for Californians. And what you see here is a rough estimate. I mean, really, we don't have really good data to specifically give a number of here's how much we think it is, but we know that it's a significant number, likely over $1 billion. This is an area where we need better data. We need to do more detailed analysis on specific projects. We need real-world performance data to help support that, and that work is ongoing. So the CEC is leading this compliance rate study as part of a suite of initiatives that's looking at compliance improvement with the energy code across the state. And again, many of you have contributed to certain aspects of those projects, including the energy code usability improvements, code restructuring that's underway right now. Looking how do we expand our compliance assistance to better support local jurisdictions with their enforcement initiatives, with tracking permit information, project information. How do we complement that with home energy ratings and labelings? I think you heard a little bit about some of the approach that we're thinking about yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. But CEC has the authority for a voluntary program across the state that's going to be doing that. And building out better data sets. We actually have a wealth of data and information that the CEC already collects. There was a question about interval meter data earlier, and it's great. That will continue, and we're going to refine the data that we collect. But making use of that is another big challenge that has resource costs, that has timelines associated with it. So it's a work in progress, but it is something that we're working to tap into that incredible resource that we already have, which also includes compliance documentation that we collect from the HERS registries, now the Energy Code Compliance Program registries. I mentioned the field study that we're doing. We're also, again, working with locals to assess how can we best support their local enforcement initiatives and be responsive to the feedback, the needs, the concerns that we're hearing from locals that includes some level of that complexity. So I'll break it down with a few of the challenges we have identified in this work thus far. There are others, but I don't want to take, I don't want to take the rest of the day here, so I'll keep it to the top three. Starting with, we have heard for a number of years feedback on the complexity of the code and how that can contribute to sort of the cost in terms of the time invested to make sure a project is complying with the code. This is namely channeling some feedback we heard from building officials through the ICC chapter meetings that our team engages with. But basically, the number of pages has grown considerably. This is the 2022 code you see visualized here on the right. It's a whole bunch of stack of binders, right? And that we should really be thinking about how to simplify, streamline, consolidate some of that information. And we have made some progress on that, which I'll talk about lately. We want to be responsive to what we're hearing, but also acknowledge that some of that complexity is necessary and has actually supported the progress that's been made, that we're building out the code to drive more efficient buildings and give more flexibility on compliance pathways. And so there's certainly a balancing act there to be had. So we also have limited data currently, despite the wealth of information we have. And really, this is displaying here from a sampling of Cheers data for, I think, last year, 2023, rather, that showed that 61% of home HVAC that were permitted were heat pumps in 2023. That's great. That's a fantastic indicator. The only problem is it only shows permitted projects. It doesn't show unpermitted projects. And so we need to make sure we have the full picture and we're telling the whole story. And there's reasons to suspect that that heat pumps are more likely to pull a permit given the alignment with incentive programs that are going on across the state. So again, supporting the need for our data and more analysis. And the third challenge that I wanted to highlight is that currently there's not a clear market value for homeowners, building owners that make investments in clean energy in the market. And this is a gap we want to fill in part on the commercial side. The building performance standard may help fill some of that gap, but mainly on the home side, with home energy rating and labeling, we want to provide the ability for builders, but also homeowners, building owners, to be able to estimate utility costs to help inform their decisions on which home, which building they may want to buy, or how to include certain measures within the building. All right, so challenges abound, and that's probably been true at any point in history. I think we are in a unique point in time for all the reasons I talked about. But we have a whole suite of solutions that we're advancing, and really we're asking for your help and engagement to make sure those are meaningful and hit the mark for how to move things forward here effectively. Starting with energy code usability improvements, and this is a kind of broad category of initiatives that starts with the restructuring of the energy code, which we actually put out a draft, I think last week it was published, and we're looking for feedback on that reduces really reduces the number of words on the page to a degree, but it also aligns the structure to more consistently meet the other building standards sections. This is an initiative that's been going on really for couple years, 2-3 years now, but starting to see the rubber meet the road on the public process side. And looking at also how do we make better use of the forms, the documentation that's required by reducing certain forms, consolidating information that may be necessary, making sure we're only collecting what we really need to verify project compliance, and how do we shore that up with other data sources that we may already be collecting or need to collect separately. I had a brief discussion on some of the lighting regulation improvements that recently were implemented. So we are taking action for certain building systems and measures. The manuals, I know there's a large volume of manuals. Others could speak to some of the details and the level of work that goes into developing and adopting those and making sure they're usable. But that's also something that we'll be focused on as part of this cycle. And then on the software side as well. So we are taking steps to consolidate the CBEC and CBEC Res into a single system as well. So exciting work. And we've had support from the builders on these initiatives. So just you see a quote here from Bob Raymer at CBIA. Excuse me. All right, this is just a visualization of the reorganization of the standards. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but I'm told by the experts that I work with that this is a much better fit for what the local building officials would expect to see, and it aligns section-wise, is a little more logical, a little more consistent with the other sections of the building code. So it's good to see that moving forward. Again, we are looking for feedback and want to make sure this is going to hit the mark for the needs of the broader community. And it's something that we're hoping will be introduced formally through the 2028 rulemaking process on the energy code. Another area we're looking closely at is with third-party verifications. On the 2025 Energy Code, we had the opportunity to update the home energy rating system regulations. It's now called the Energy Code Compliance Program with a focus on residential. And as part of that, there was a lot of focus on introducing more oversight ability for the providers, looking closely at raters and rater companies, and making sure the CEC has broad visibility on what's going on across the verification community. And so as part of that, we've seen some steps already taken with rater oversight. Cheers has been proactive in implementing that even before the new code goes into effect next year. And so that does go into effect in January. And one of the things we're hoping to do is leverage the lessons learned and some of that work there to focus on the non-residential side in this coming cycle as well. We'll see what that might look like ultimately and the timing, because some of that is impacted by the regulatory constraints that we're facing. I mentioned compliance data and analysis. We know that there's a very broad ecosystem out there with thousands of different experts working on energy code compliance. We've got a table that summarizes a handful of those here. But we do have some initial data that's going to be helpful for us to get some initial insights, and we're going to highlight a couple of those here. But we have some gaps that we need to fill, and that's where our study will come in, which was we pursued funding for an $18 million grant that's going to allow us to work with locals across the state with a broad range of projects and do some internal analysis to get a better indicator of what compliance looks like in terms of the savings that are potentially left on the table due to non-compliance, and then ultimately focus on solutions. Okay, how do we shore up processes to minimize that number as much as we can? This is just illustrating some of the data that we do collect today, and it's a busy slide here, but really looking at line extension requests that we received. The CPUC shares this data with us, and we've started publicizing some of that, but basically looking at I think it's roughly 80% of projects, at least on the residential side, across the utilities, we're looking at all electric. So this is one of the indicators that we have that shows there's a lot of growth on the all electric new community build out. However, we want to make sure we're matching that up with the actual project compliance data that we're tracking, and there's gaps because that's looking at only permitted projects at this point. So this is one data source that we're making use of today. Another avenue we're exploring is, okay, how do we make track of what equipment is flowing in and out, really into California, into specific projects, and looking at tracking that through equipment sales, primarily for HVAC systems. There's an initiative where we're introducing a request for information that's asking for feedback on how do we do this most effectively. We've already gotten an initial round of feedback where there was a broad range of perspectives that we heard, and we're going to be taking next steps on that in the next couple of months here, and plan to approach a formal rulemaking to collect that data in the near future. This will be a helpful and valuable data set to help us identify unpermitted work. There's limited ways to go about that. We've got a creative team that's thinking about this, that's looking at, are there AI approaches? Are there satellite imagery approaches that we might be using? How do we tap into the interval meter data? Having HVAC sales is a good avenue to give us another thread to pull on there. And I mentioned Assembly Bill 130. This was a bill that was passed this past summer as part of the budget cycle. It was signed into law in June of this year. It introduces a moratorium on the adoption of residential building standards for the 2028 code cycle. So for the next 6 years, really next cycle, we won't have new residential measures going to effect, and are limited in any ability to even update those, with some narrow exceptions, primarily for health and safety. But we do have the ability to focus on non-residential measures, and so there's a whole suite of thinking on what those specific measures might look like. We know there's a ton of savings potential out there, and we're working with the other regulatory agencies to make sure we understand the nuances and the process challenges that might come up, because this is atypical for the building standard cycle. I'm going to avoid going into great detail on this slide, but really just a snapshot of what we're looking at in 2028. The case process is well underway at this point with the utility sponsored efforts looking at a variety of non-residential measures here. And the CEC is also leading some initiatives in parallel. We mentioned the code usability updates, also looking at potentially some PV updates for non-residential and some greenhouse updates that we might need to address. But non-residential AC to heat pumps is another area. Again, heat pumps is kind of the top of the list of measures that we're looking at, as well as large buildings. And I think there's an initiative to start having that conversation of what does the intersection of building performance standards look like with the Building Energy Efficiency Code over time. And certainly will not say that we've solved it to any degree. We don't have a BPS policy in the state of California at this point. We hope that there will be at some point in the future, but that's dependent upon legislative action to implement that. But when that happens, we want to be prepared to be able to explain the synergy between the energy code and building performance standards. And a lot of discussion has already talked about existing buildings. We do have some big ideas for existing buildings at the state of California. Again, we've made a lot of progress on the new construction side of the equation and recognize that there's still a ton of challenge on the existing building side of the equation, where we're looking at 14 million residential units across the state. This is actually a little outdated at this point. I think it's slightly higher than that. And billions of square footage of commercial space across the state. And so how do we really tackle that to achieve the emissions reductions that we need, but also focus on the affordability side? So that cost effectiveness discussion that was started earlier, super important as we're looking at addressing existing buildings. They face unique challenges, especially on the first cost side, where somebody's already living in a home, already living in housed in a building, and they have to face that initial cost as well as any bill savings benefit. So we kind of need to take a special sensitivity to as we look at existing buildings measures. But we know that this is the greatest opportunity moving forward to address emissions and efficiency. It's also the central focus of California's equitable building decarbonization strategy, which really looks at how do we prioritize the needs of low-income consumers and make sure that they're at the front of benefiting from this transition to heat pumps primarily, but decarbonizing buildings across the state. So there was at one point roughly $1 billion program. Now it's several hundred million that's looking at direct install to do just that in combination with efficiency measures and also electrification. But then how do we consider the non-energy benefit side of the equation? There's a lot of focus on bill savings, but how do we accurately address all the other benefit streams that the customer will realize, as well as the state as a whole? Home energy rating and labeling. Again, I think there's more depth in some of the other discussions on this. Zero Homes approach is providing some valuable data on this, but really what we're looking at is updating our home energy rating and labeling program, which is a voluntary program for the time being, at least, to make sure that there's a way to reflect bill or energy costs, estimated energy costs, to inform decisions on how homes compare to each other. I like to think of it as the fuel mileage sticker equivalent for buildings. My team doesn't necessarily always like when I say that, but it helps me wrap my head around what we're trying to do. Something that is agnostic of consumer behavior, that can be more of like an apples to apples across the state, but also looking at how do we do that in a way that illustrates what will happen in the real world. So it's kind of, we're trying to have both sides of the equation, and I think we've got some good progress in how to go about that. But we do know that there's evidence from other countries that such an approach can drive actual market valuations for real estate. For example, Denmark, my colleague Will Vicent, I know many of you here know him, is actually in Denmark right now gathering some intel on this and many other programs underway. But they've shown that there's up to, I think, a $40,000 difference in a home price when you have a high-performing labeled building to a low-performing. So there's real value to be had there. We're also considering how to approach carbon emissions in some of the metrics discussion here. And really looking at a two-tiered approach that starts first with, again, we have all this data. How can we tap into this data to provide a no-cost option that looks at all California homes as a first cut? And so a remote, scalable approach that utilizes the data we already have, and we're working on a pilot with SCE and with Zero Home and other key partners to do that. And then a second tier that's maybe somebody has reason to disagree with that tier one approach or wants something that's more refined that looks specifically at the home. And so something that's a tier two that would use the home energy score approach. And again, we're working with the Bay Ren team who's already made some progress on that in California and trying to advance the home energy score approach for a statewide scalability. Building energy performance strategy, I'm gonna avoid going into great detail here because you just heard a great discussion on that. But as we look at commercial buildings, the largest buildings in the state, which have a ton of savings potential, how are we tracking that? Right now it's through the benchmarking program. There's a focus on compliance because I will say it's been a bit of a road with COVID hiccups and a bunch of other things going on to make sure that there's consistent compliance across the state with this program. But we're seeing now with concerted effort, that numbers ramping up and growing every day. And this also is our key platform to how do we scale to a building energy performance standard, which again, we're required to submit that report to the legislature by next summer. We're hoping to publish a draft well ahead of that. And I'll just leave it with the California Utility Allowance Calculator. There's a lot of focus again on how do we look at the bill side of the equation, not just the investment side of the equation. And this is one approach that does just that, and mainly with the target of affordable housing and the how to go after tax credits with the Tax Credit Allocation Committee. And now it's built into the CBEC software, so it allows people to go into CBEC for even projects that aren't affordable housing specifically, and look at the utility bill estimates there. Load flexibility, I just want to remind everyone, I know this is built into much of our metrics and our thinking, but the shift of not just focusing on saving kilowatt hours, period, but when we save those kilowatt hours matters just as much as the total volume, with a focus on emissions, a focus on load flexibility. There's a whole suite of things going on there that I'm going to avoid going into, but it is a central focus of our efficiency strategy at this point, along with a number of other things. I mentioned building decarbonization, which has been in the top of the policy discussion, load flexibility, which really is a new way to look at efficiency, resiliency, all the other non-energy benefits, the wildfire mitigation, extreme heat response, and affordability and equity, which is really the core of this presentation, and I think something that we need to continue to focus on centrally as we move forward. But the platform and the foundation here is really energy efficiency. So I think we're in a strong position with these policies, with all the work that everyone is doing here, to refocus on the affordability aspect of energy efficiency while also enabling the range of other benefits that you see here. And I'll just say that really appreciate the engagement here. I encourage an active dialogue with the CEC folks and others, and it's an interactive process. So we want to hear success stories, challenges, feedback on our proposals, and really anything that's on your mind that might be helpful. With that, I will say thank you and open it up for Q&A.
Travis next to me actually brought this up. Gina Rada, when are we going to start looking at compliance of modeling, not just installation like we do with HERS, ATTs? When are we going to get certified energy consultants associated with the code?
I think that's a fantastic idea, and I know it's one that our team has explored, that we were pursuing some federal funding to help support that, which unfortunately is not moving forward at this point. And so we are looking at how can we do something like that at a pilot scale that might scale to more of a statewide initiative. To me, it's a great idea. I will admit some of it's beyond my areas of expertise, so I want to engage others from our team. But I think it makes a ton of sense to me that you want to make sure you're complying up front on the design side and the modeling side to drive compliance on the back end and actual performance. So great idea, great suggestion.
Thank you, Michael. We have the two data registries, CalCERS and CHEERS. They've been there for, I think, since the 2013 cycle, but we don't have access to that data. Will there ever be a repository where we can actually look in there and see, for instance, how much roof deck insulation is going, what type of windows, heat pumps, and so on and so forth? That would be really helpful to map out the future standards, and also will we extend that to the non-residential buildings? Thank
you, Mazi. Yeah, great question. Let me pull up my slide B or part B presentation, and I'll walk you through the next hour. No, I almost had a slide for that, and I think that's a really key point. That's one of those data sets for the residential side the CEC already has in-house. Now it's just how do we translate that to actionable insights that can inform our policies, including maybe externally, and I put a question mark on that because there are complexities around personal information, proprietary information. I think we have to meet certain aggregation thresholds and things like that, so there's some legal scaffolding that has to come in, but we do know that with the right protections in place, that data can be really informative for measure evaluation, for looking back, how did we do on XYZ, and right now that's focused on residential, which includes past CalCERT's data. CalCERT's is no longer operating, by the way. There's a second registry that exists called Golden State Registry that's just really ramping up at this point. And the non-residential side is on our roadmap as in a subsequent phase that we hope aligns with our 2028 rulemaking.
Thank you. Sarah is here. Well, I saw that in one of your slides, you were mentioning that the utility on the rise because of fire. It's not the case, for sure, because utility was on the rise before the fire. And the other thing is that I'm very glad today that you are bringing up the affordability. That was, I'm going to be very honest here, I was totally hopeless till this moment, because all these CECs doing great, but they don't really take care of how much initial cost will be on the Californians to put all this amazing, technology. And as someone who is on the ground and dealing with distressed architects, distressed owners, coming to us to help them, to show compliance, I totally see that in our day-to-day job. So, and equity index is super important, right? It's always about sustainability. You have environment, we have our energy efficiency, and then we have the society. And the society can be equity. And when we are focusing on one thing too much, then the balance, we are going to be out of the balance. So I'm very glad that is something on your plate. So thank you for that. But the other thing I want to discuss is that equity is not just the affordability, right? Equity is not just about affordable housing or, because there are a lot of middle-class families who are living paycheck to paycheck, right? They are saving their monies to do the remodeling. And I've seen this, I didn't disclose to them who I am, the person who is doing Title 24. I just asked them, okay, what about this glass that you put it there? Is that follow the Title 24? And they were like, no. I don't have money for it. I have 3 kids. That's too expensive and too complex. So I just went there and bought whatever I can. I wanted to invest that on my children's education. So 2 things I want to suggest. One, maybe we can do some sort of public vote. I don't want to say vote, but gathering information of how many people are really following our recommendations. And for existing buildings, for remodeling, are they really, you show the heat pump and, these are the ones that they got the permit. There are a lot of buildings that they didn't get the permit. So I think that we should have that some sort of information that helps us, right? And then for the complexity of the code, it just occurred to me that, we just do it internally using AI, and I think that can be very helpful. So you can have AI, but it should, to be honest with you, I rather to be the CEC doing it, creating their own version of AI, feeding the code to the AI, and then people can ask. If I'm a mechanical engineer, I will ask, this is my building. like where should I go, or I'm looking for this table, can you just bring it in? And I think that that would be a great tool moving forward. Yeah.
Thank you for that feedback and good suggestion. And I will say that's something that we've kind of started a brainstorming phase. Government doesn't always move super quickly to implement new technologies. I like to think that the CEC is fairly progressive and that we do a pretty good job, but it does take some time. And so I like the idea, and also really take your feedback on the equity discussion to heart. And I think that's one of the things that I probably could have done a better job characterizing the broad scope of equity initiatives at the CEC, but also I hope on the energy code context, our compliance rate study will help fill some of those gaps. Like you mentioned, what's going on in real homes across the state. It's challenging to find those projects that didn't pull permits for their work, but we're doing our best, and we're gonna fill those gaps through a variety of different mechanisms. All right, thank you so much.
That is the sort of presentation aspect we have this morning for you all before we head into working groups. First, though, a break. So please enjoy your break.